Captain Lee Jun stood by the big window of his ship, watching the huge space station get bigger and bigger as they got closer. The station was called Galactic Assembly Central, and it was the most important place in the galaxy where all the alien races met to talk about important things. His ship's sole pride was moving slowly toward the docking bay, but Lee Jun felt heavy in his heart, because he knew this would be the last time humans would come here as friends. The captain remembered when he was just a young officer 15 years ago when the first aliens came to Earth. They were scared and running from something terrible in deep space. They begged humans to help them fight against monsters called void hunters. These monsters were eating planets and killing everyone they found. The aliens said they had tried to fight, but they were too weak and too scared. Humans said yes to help them, even though it was dangerous. Admiral Park, who was Lee Jun's commander back then, told all the human soldiers that they were going to save the galaxy. It sounded exciting and noble back then. Young Lee Jun believed they were doing the right thing, helping innocent people who could not help themselves. The war against the void hunters was horrible. Many human soldiers died fighting in dark space where normal physics did not work properly. Lee Jun lost many friends in that war. His best friend Kim Tae died when his ship got pulled into a reality crack trying to save an alien colony. The aliens never even said thank you for Kim Tae's sacrifice. They just asked for more human soldiers to die for them. After the void hunters were defeated, the aliens asked humans to help with other problems. Space pirates were attacking trade ships, so humans sent patrol fleets. Rogue robots were taking over planets, so human marines went to destroy them. Criminal gangs were kidnapping alien children, so human special forces hunted them down. Every time there was danger, the aliens called for human help, and humans always answered. But as years passed, something changed. The aliens started to notice that humans were getting stronger. Human military had grown bigger to fight all these wars. Human technology had improved from all the battles. Human ships were now the most powerful in the galaxy, and human soldiers were feared by every criminal and monster in space. Ambassador Park Min was sitting in the assembly meeting hall watching all the alien representatives talk. She had worked for 20 years trying to build friendship between humans and aliens. She learned their languages, spoke at their universities, and helped write treaties between different species. But now she was watching them vote to kick humans out of the assembly. The alien who was speaking was Chancellor Vex from the Altarian Republic. He had 4 arms and blue skin, and he was waving all his arms while he talked about how dangerous humans had become. He said humans had too many weapons and too many soldiers. He said humans were becoming a threat to peace in the Galaxy Park. Min wanted to laugh, but she was too angry. The same aliens who were calling humans dangerous had begged for human protection just last year. When the Zephyr pirates attacked Altarian colonies, who did they call? They called Human Fleet Commander Oh Sung and his battle group to save them. Commander Oh and his crews risked their lives fighting the pirates in asteroid fields where one mistake meant death. They saved millions of Altarian civilians and lost 12 good human pilots doing it. Chancellor Vex was standing there calling humans aggressive and militaristic. He talked about how humans had built too many ships and trained too many soldiers. He said other species were worried that humans might use their military against peaceful worlds. He never mentioned that every human ship and every human soldier had been built and trained to protect those same peaceful worlds. The vote was not even close. Every major alien species voted yes to Resolution 847, which would ban humans from having military bases in assembly space. It would also stop humans from patrolling trade routes and remove human peacekeepers from contested worlds. The resolution said that humanity had become a threat to galactic stability and needed to be contained. Ambassador Park Min felt sick watching the vote. She thought about all the human families who had lost sons and daughters protecting these same aliens. She thought about Captain Nam, who died saving a vegan medical station. She thought about Commander Yu, who lost her arm stopping a slave trading ring that was kidnapping alien children. She thought about thousands of human soldiers buried on alien worlds far from Earth. When the final vote was counted, the result was announced. Humanity would have 30 days to remove all military forces from assembly space. All defense treaties with human governments were canceled. All joint military operations would end. Immediately, humans could still trade with alien species, but they could not have any military presence outside their own solar system. The news reached Earth within hours. President An was in an emergency meeting with the Defense Council when the message came. Admiral Song read the assembly resolution out loud, and the room went completely quiet for a long minute. Then President An stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Seoul below. The president turned back to the council and said something that would change galactic history forever. He said if the galaxy wanted humans to leave, then humans would leave completely. Not just the military, but everything. Human scientists would stop sharing research. Human doctors would stop helping with alien diseases. Human engineers would stop maintaining the emergency systems that kept space stations working. Human rescue ships would stop answering distress calls. Admiral Song understood immediately. He started sending orders to every human fleet in space. Come home, he told them. All of them. Every ship, every soldier, every scientist, every diplomat. Everyone was to return to human space immediately. The galaxy had made its choice, and now humans would make theirs. Dr. Kim Sun was working late in her laboratory on the Centauri research station when she got the recall order. She had spent 5 years developing new medicines that could work on different alien biology. Her research had saved thousands of lives from diseases that only affected certain species, but now she was ordered to delete all her work and return to Earth. Kim Sun looked at her computer files containing years of research. She had worked with alien scientists who had become her friends. They had shared data and ideas, and together they had made discoveries that helped everyone. But the recall order was clear. All research data was to be deleted before leaving. No human knowledge was to be left behind for aliens who saw humans as a threat. With tears in her eyes, Kim Sun started deleting files. Medicine formulas that could cure Altarian bone disease. Gone vaccine data that prevented vegan neural plague. Gone emergency medical procedures for treating radiation poisoning in different alien species. Gone all of it, disappearing from the databases one file at a time. Across the galaxy, the same thing was happening. Human technicians were shutting down the monitoring systems they had built to watch for dangerous space anomalies. Human engineers were taking apart the emergency beacons that warned ships about hazardous areas. Human military advisors were packing up the defense plans they had written to protect alien worlds from invasion. Captain Lee Jun received his final orders as Seoul Pride docked at the assembly station. He was to collect Ambassador Park Min and any other human diplomats, then leave immediately. He was not to offer any explanations or arguments. He was just to take humans home and let the aliens figure out their own problems. As Lee Jun walked through the station corridors, he saw aliens staring at him. Some looked guilty as if they knew they had made a mistake. Others looked relieved as if they were happy to see humans leaving. A few young aliens who had worked with human scientists looked sad and confused, as if they did not understand why their human friends were abandoning them. Ambassador Park Min was packing her office when Lee Jun found her. She had boxes full of treaties and agreements and friendship documents that would never matter again. She looked tired and older than Lee Jun remembered. 20 years of diplomatic work ending because the people she had tried to help decided she was their enemy. The last human ships left assembly space exactly 30 days after the vote. The aliens watched them go, and many felt relieved that the dangerous humans were finally gone. Some alien leaders made speeches about how the galaxy was now safer without human military presence. Others talked about a new age of peace and cooperation between species. But in the dark spaces between galaxies, something else was watching the human ships leave. Something that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. Something that remembered the last time humans had interfered with its plans. Something that was now free to continue the work that humans had interrupted 15 years ago. The galaxy had chosen to stand alone against the darkness, and in that darkness, ancient things began to stir. 3 months had passed since the last human ship left assembly space, and Captain Nal was feeling proud of himself as he sat in his command chair at Assembly Security Headquarters. The Galactic Assembly was running smoothly, without human interference. Trade was flowing between worlds, and there had been no major conflicts since the humans went home. Everything was peaceful, just like the politicians had promised. The first report that came to Nal's desk seemed like nothing important. A merchant ship, called Lucky Star, had disappeared along the Kepler trade route. The ship was carrying basic supplies from the industrial world of Mechanica to the farming colonies in the Outer Rim. When Lucky Star failed to arrive at its destination, the colonies sent out a search request. Nal looked at the report and shrugged his shoulders. Ships went missing all the time in space. There were pirates and mechanical failures and navigation errors that could make a ship disappear. The Outer Rim was always dangerous, because it was far from the main shipping lanes where patrol ships could help. If merchants wanted to take risks flying through empty space, that was their choice. 2 days later, another ship vanished along the same route. This time it was a passenger liner called New Hope, carrying 300 alien families to start new lives on frontier worlds. The ship sent a distress signal that was picked up by a nearby relay station, but when rescue ships arrived, they found nothing. No wreckage, no escape pods, no sign that New Hope had ever been there. Nal started to feel a little worried, but he told himself it was probably pirates. Pirates sometimes worked in groups, and the Kepler route was known for being isolated. Maybe some criminal gang had decided to take advantage of the fact that human patrol ships were no longer protecting the area. That would make sense. Pirates always got bolder when they thought no one was watching. Jung Han was sitting in his new office on Luna Station looking at the same reports that Nal was seeing. But Jung Han felt a cold fear growing in his stomach. Jung Han had worked for 15 years as the human liaison to the Assembly Defense Committee. He knew how space pirates operated. And this was not how pirates worked. Pirates wanted cargo and passengers that they could sell. Pirates did not make ships disappear completely without leaving any trace. Pirates especially did not attack passenger liners, because passenger liners did not carry valuable cargo, and kidnapping hundreds of people was more trouble than it was worth. Something else was happening in the Kepler route. And Jung Han had a terrible feeling. He knew what it was. The patterns were too familiar. Jung Han had seen reports like this before, 15 years ago when the Void Hunters first appeared in the galaxy. Back then, ships had started disappearing in the same way. No distress calls, no wreckage, no survivors. Just empty space where ships should have been. The disappearances had started, slowly with 1 or 2 ships, then more and more until entire fleets were vanishing. Jung Han tried to send a warning message to Assembly Security, but his communications were blocked. His diplomatic access had been revoked when humans left the Assembly, and now he could not even send an official report. He tried to contact Captain Nal directly, but Nal refused to take his call. The Assembly did not want to hear from humans anymore. Even when humans were trying to help, Dr. Yu Jin was working in her laboratory on Earth when she noticed something strange in the deep space monitoring data. The Centauri research station had gone silent 2 weeks ago. The station had been built by humans to watch for unusual activity in the space between galaxies. It had the most sensitive detection equipment in the known universe, and it had never stopped sending data since it was built. The silence from Centauri Station was not like a mechanical failure or a power outage. Those kinds of problems usually caused partial data loss or error messages. The station had simply stopped transmitting anything at all, as if it had never existed. Yu Jin checked the records and found that the last transmission from Centauri had been a routine status report, saying everything was normal. Jin felt her hands shaking as she realized what this meant. Centauri Station was humanity's early warning system for threats coming from deep space. If something had happened to the station, then the inner worlds of the galaxy were blind to dangers approaching from the void between galaxies. The aliens had insisted that humans remove all their monitoring equipment when they left assembly space, and now that equipment was gone. When the assembly finally decided to investigate the missing ships, they sent a small patrol fleet to the Kepler route. The fleet was led by Commander Kex, who was confident that they would find pirates or smugglers or some other ordinary explanation for the disappearances. Kex had never fought against anything more dangerous than tax evaders and cargo thieves. The assembly patrol found the first sign of trouble at the edge of the Kepler system. There was a debris field floating in space, but it was not normal ship wreckage. The debris looked like pieces of metal that had been twisted and bent in impossible ways, as if the laws of physics had stopped working properly when the ships were destroyed. Commander Kex ordered his science officer to scan the debris, and the results made no sense. The metal showed signs of being stretched and compressed at the same time. Some pieces appeared to be older than the ships they came from, while other pieces seemed to exist in multiple places at once. The science officer reported that his instruments were giving readings that violated everything they knew about how matter worked. The patrol fleet continued deeper into the Kepler route and found something that made Commander Kex wish he had never volunteered for this mission. Floating in space near where the passenger liner New Hope should have been was a structure that hurt to look at directly. It was made of angles that seemed to fold in on themselves and surfaces that appeared to be both inside and outside at the same time. The structure was covered in symbols that seemed to move and change when anyone tried to focus on them. The symbols made the alien crew members feel sick and dizzy, and some of them started having strange dreams even while they were awake. The ship's computer could not analyze the symbols because they appeared to be different every time the sensors scanned them. Commander Kex tried to get closer to the structure, but his ship's navigation system started malfunctioning. Instruments that had worked perfectly for years began giving impossible readings. The ship's computer reported that they were moving in several directions at once, and that their position was somehow both inside and outside normal space. One of Kex's crew members, a young engineer named Dav, suddenly started screaming and pointing at the structure. Dav said he could see the passengers from New Hope inside the impossible angles of the alien construction, but they were not dead, and they were not alive. They were something else, something that existed in the spaces between normal existence. Commander Kex ordered an immediate retreat, but found that his ship would not respond to navigation commands. They were trapped in the area around the structure, and normal physics seemed to be breaking down around them. The ship's engines worked, but they did not seem to be moving through space in any way that made sense. After 6 hours of trying to escape, the patrol fleet finally broke free from whatever force was holding them near the structure. They limped back to assembly space with half their crew in medical bay, suffering from what the doctors called reality shock. The crew members who had looked directly at the structure kept talking about angles that went nowhere and spaces that existed inside other spaces. Commander Kex filed a report that was so disturbing that assembly security classified it immediately. The report described technology that was beyond anything any known species could build. It described physics that worked according to rules that no one understood. It described creatures that might exist in the spaces between dimensions. The assembly leadership met an emergency session to discuss Commander Kex's report. Most of the politicians wanted to dismiss it as hallucinations or equipment failure. They said that there had to be a reasonable explanation for what the patrol fleet had seen. They refused to believe that something impossible was happening in their galaxy, but deep in the classified archives of assembly intelligence, there were files that had been sealed for 15 years. Files that described humanity's war against entities that existed outside normal reality. Files that explained why humans had developed such strange and powerful weapons. Files that revealed the true reason why the Void Hunters had disappeared from the galaxy. The files contained one terrifying conclusion. The entities that humans called Void Hunters had not been destroyed in the war 15 years ago. They had only been pushed back into the spaces between dimensions. They had been waiting for the right moment to return, and that moment had come when humanity withdrew its protection from the galaxy, in the empty spaces where human monitoring stations used to watch the darkness between stars. Something ancient and hungry was stirring. The barriers that had held it back were weakening, and soon it would be strong enough to begin the work that humans had interrupted so long ago. The galaxy had chosen to stand alone, and now it was about to learn what had been waiting in the shadows for humanity to look away. The attack on Harmony came without any warning at all. The peaceful world was home to 40 million beings from 12 different species who had chosen to live together in the first truly integrated colony in the galaxy. Children of different races played together in parks while their parents worked side by side, building a better future for everyone. Dr. Vell was in his laboratory studying plant genetics when the sky above New Eden City began to tear apart, like fabric being ripped by invisible hands. The tears were not black holes or energy weapons, but something far more terrifying. They were cracks in reality itself, showing glimpses of spaces that should not exist. Through the tears came shapes that hurt to look at directly. They were not ships or creatures, but living geometry that existed in too many dimensions at once. Some parts of them appeared to be inside out, while other parts seemed to be folded through spaces that were not there. The shapes moved in ways that made watchers feel sick and confused. President An was in the emergency command center on Earth when the first reports from Harmony reached human space. The descriptions made no sense to the military advisors who had never fought against interdimensional entities, but An recognized the signs immediately. 15 years ago, when he was just a colonel, he had seen the same impossible geometry during the Void Hunter War. The beings that emerged from the reality, Tears, did not attack Harmony in any normal way. They did not fire weapons or drop bombs or send soldiers to fight. Instead, they began to sing. The sound was not heard through ears, but felt deep in the bones and souls of every living thing on the planet. It was a song that reality itself seemed to recognize and obey. As the song continued, strange things began happening on Harmony. Gravity started working differently in some areas, making people float, while in other places it became so strong that buildings were crushed flat. Time began moving, in loops and spirals, so that some people experienced the same moment over and over. While others aged years and minutes, Dr. Ko-Jin was monitoring the situation from his research station on Mars, where he studied the physics of dimensional barriers. Ko-Jin had spent his career trying to understand how the Void Hunters moved between realities, and now he was watching them demonstrate abilities that were even more terrifying than he had imagined. The entities were not destroying Harmony. They were remaking it. The song they sang was actually a form of reality engineering that changed the basic rules of how space and time worked. The planet was being converted into something that could exist comfortably in multiple dimensions at once, a bridge between normal space and the void where the singers lived. The Assembly sent their most powerful warships to defend Harmony, but nothing they did had any effect. Energy weapons bent around impossible angles and disappeared into spaces that did not exist. Physical missiles passed through the geometric beings as if they were trying to shoot at mirages. The alien song grew stronger and more complex. As if it was feeding on the attempts to stop it, Admiral Zorth commanded the assembly fleet from his flagship Galactic Pride, and watched in horror as his weapons proved useless against enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. His gunners reported that their targeting systems could not lock onto the entities because they appeared to be in several different locations at the same time. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted for 3 days. During that time, the geometric beings slowly reshaped Harmony into something that no longer followed the laws of physics that governed the rest of the galaxy. Ships trying to approach the planet found themselves arriving before they had left, or discovering multiple versions of themselves already in orbit. By the 4th day, Harmony still existed, but it had become something else. The planet itself had been twisted into a shape that existed in more dimensions than normal space could contain. Looking at it through telescopes made observers feel dizzy and sick as their brains tried to process geometry that was impossible. General, who was watching the transformation from his command post on Luna Station Yi, had been the one to develop the tactics that finally drove the Void Hunters back into interdimensional space 15 years ago. He understood immediately what the entities had accomplished. They had not conquered Harmony. They had made it into a beacon. The transformed planet was now broadcasting a signal across the galaxy, not through radio waves or subspace transmissions, but through the fundamental structure of reality itself. Every species that detected the signal would know that something impossible had awakened, something that could rewrite the laws of physics themselves. The panic spread faster than any spaceship could travel. Trade routes shut down as merchant captains refused to fly through space that might suddenly decide to operate under different rules. Planetary governments began evacuating their populations to heavily fortified core worlds, but even there, no one felt truly safe. On the industrial world of Mechanica, factory workers looked up at the sky and wondered if gravity would still work tomorrow. On the farming colonies of the Outer Rim, parents held their children close and prayed that time would continue moving forward in the right direction. On the trading stations that connected different star systems, merchants abandoned their goods and fled toward home. The Altarian Republic, which had led the campaign against human militarization, was the first major government to completely collapse. Chancellor Vex tried to maintain order, but his people were too terrified to listen. When reality itself could be edited like a computer program, nowhere was safe and no leader could promise protection. Dr. Yoon was working frantically in her physics laboratory trying to understand what the entities had done to Harmony. Her instruments showed readings that violated every known law of science. The planet appeared to exist in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, while also somehow being completely normal from certain angles of observation. The worst part was that Yoon could see a pattern in what the entities were doing. They were not randomly changing reality, they were building something. Each transformed location became a node in a growing network, a vast geometric structure that spanned multiple star systems and extended into dimensions that mathematics could barely describe. Intelligence reports from across the galaxy painted a terrifying picture. The entities were systematically targeting specific worlds and space stations, not for their strategic value but for their dimensional properties. They were choosing locations that would serve as anchor points for their interdimensional construction project. Commander Bay was monitoring deep space communications from his listening post when he detected the first signals from other transformed worlds. The vegan medical station had been converted into something that existed in folded space. The Procyon mining complex now operated according to physics that allowed matter to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Each transformation made the network stronger and more stable. The entities were approaching some kind of critical threshold, and once they reached it, they would be able to extend their reality manipulation across the entire galaxy. Everything that existed in normal space would be reshaped to accommodate beings that lived in impossible geometries. The Galactic Assembly called emergency sessions, but their discussions were meaningless against an enemy that could change the rules of existence itself. Military commanders proposed strategies that assumed conventional physics, while scientists tried to explain phenomena that their instruments could not measure. Some alien species attempted to negotiate with the entities, offering to serve as ambassadors or intermediaries in exchange for being spared transformation. But the geometric beings showed no interest in communication. They had their own agenda, and it did not include preserving the galaxy as it currently existed. As more worlds fell to the reality singers, the fabric of space itself began to show strain. Stars flickered as gravity waves passed through regions where the laws of physics had been rewritten. Hyperspace travel became unreliable as navigation computers tried to plot courses through areas where distance and time no longer worked normally. The Assembly leadership finally admitted what many had already realized: they were facing an enemy that could not be fought with conventional weapons or defeated through normal military tactics. The entities existed in spaces between realities and followed rules that no Assembly species understood. In the deepest archives of Assembly intelligence, desperate researchers found fragments of classified human military reports from the previous Void Hunter conflict. The documents had been heavily censored, but they contained references to weapons and tactics that operated on principles the aliens could not comprehend. The reports suggested that humans had not just fought the entities, they had found ways to follow them into interdimensional space and engage them on their own terms. Humanity had developed technology and strategies that could function in areas where normal physics broke down. As the geometric network continued to grow across the galaxy, one terrible truth became clear. The same military capabilities that the Assembly had feared as a threat might be the only hope for preventing the complete transformation of reality itself. The galaxy had chosen to stand alone against the darkness, and now that darkness was reshaping everything they knew into something unrecognizable. The emergency meeting on Bastion Prime brought together the greatest minds from every species in the Assembly. The Fortress world was supposed to be the safest place in the galaxy, with shields that could stop planet-killer weapons and defenses that had never been breached. But as Dr. Vell stood before the assembled scientists and military leaders, everyone knew that conventional defenses meant nothing against enemies that could rewrite reality. Dr. Vell had spent 2 weeks studying the data from Harmony and the other transformed worlds, and his findings terrified even himself. The entities were not invading from another galaxy or dimension. They were emerging from the spaces that existed in the gaps between normal reality. These gaps had always been there, but something had been keeping the entities contained until now. Commander Bay was listening to the meeting from his monitoring station in human space, and he understood what Dr. Vell had discovered. The barriers between dimensions were breaking down because the network of human early warning stations was no longer maintaining them. For 15 years, human technology had been reinforcing the walls of reality, without the aliens even knowing it. The entities that the Assembly called reality singers were actually the same void hunters that humanity had fought decades earlier. But now they were fully awakened and no longer contained by the interdimensional barriers that had previously trapped them. The network they were building would allow them to exist permanently in normal space while maintaining their ability to manipulate reality. General Cass stood up during the meeting and proposed a plan that made everyone in the room go silent. She suggested using planet destroyer weapons on any world that the entities targeted. This would prevent them from creating more reality distortion beacons. Even if it meant sacrificing billions of innocent lives, Admiral Zorth disagreed with Cass's plan and suggested something equally desperate. He wanted to evacuate entire star systems and create fire breaks of empty space around the entity network. This would slow their expansion and buy time to find a real solution. But everyone knew that evacuating billions of people was impossible, and the entities could probably cross empty space anyway. Shin was working in his laboratory on Earth analyzing intercepted assembly communications and compiling a report that painted the galaxy's situation in the starkest possible terms. The entity network was approaching critical mass, and mathematical models showed that once it reached a certain threshold, it would be capable of reshaping reality across the entire galaxy. The transformation would not be violent or destructive in any traditional sense. Instead, the galaxy would simply be made more suitable for beings that existed in impossible geometries. Normal matter would still exist, but it would follow new rules that allowed interdimensional entities to live comfortably in the same space as regular creatures. As more worlds fell to the reality, Singer's patterns began to emerge that made xenobiologists across the galaxy wake up screaming from nightmares. The entities were not randomly attacking, they were following a specific plan. Each transformed world became a node in a growing structure that extended across multiple star systems. The Vegan Collective was the first major government to attempt negotiating with the entities. They sent diplomatic ships to the Yao, transformed world that had once been their medical station, hoping to establish communication with the reality singers. The ships never returned, but telescopic observations showed them orbiting the impossible geometry and patterns that hurt to watch. The Altarian Republic tried a different approach. They announced their complete surrender to the entities and began broadcasting the coordinates of other inhabited worlds, hoping that cooperation would save them from transformation. The strategy failed. When their capital world was converted anyway, the geometric beings apparently having no interest in deals or alliances, Chancellor Vex found himself in the impossible position of watching everything he had worked to build collapse around him. Galactic Assembly was falling apart as member species panicked and fled toward their home systems. Trade had stopped completely, and communication networks were failing. As reality distortions interfered with subspace transmissions, intelligence reports suggested that humanity had fought these entities before and somehow achieved victory. The same military capabilities that the Assembly had feared as a threat might be the only hope for preventing universal transformation. But asking for human help would mean admitting that they had made a terrible mistake. In the deepest vaults of the Assembly archives, researchers worked around the clock searching through classified documents for any information about humanity's previous war against the Void Hunters. Most of the files had been sealed or redacted, but fragments remained that described weapons and strategies operating on principles the aliens did not understand. The documents contained references to reality anchors that could create stable zones where normal physics worked properly. They described ships that could follow the entities into interdimensional space and fight them on their own terms. They mentioned soldiers who could perceive impossible geometries without losing their sanity. Dr. Yoon discovered the most important fragment buried in a medical report from 15 years ago. The document described human crews who had been exposed to interdimensional warfare and developed the ability to impose their understanding of reality on areas where physics had broken down. Human consciousness apparently had unique properties that allowed it to stabilize quantum fluctuations. The revelation was both hopeful and terrifying. Humans were not just better at fighting interdimensional entities, they were fundamentally different from other species in ways that made them naturally resistant to reality manipulation. Where alien minds collapsed when exposed to impossible geometry, Human minds seemed to force reality to make sense as the entity network continued to grow. The fabric of space itself began showing signs of severe strain. Navigation became unreliable as hyperspace routes shifted without warning. Stars appeared to flicker as gravitational waves passed through regions where the laws of physics were being rewritten. The transformation of the galaxy was accelerating. Each new node in the entity network made it easier for them to convert the next target. The mathematical progression was terrifying. Within months, they would reach the critical threshold that would allow them to reshape reality across thousands of star systems. Commander O was monitoring the situation from his post in the outer solar system when he detected something that made his blood run cold. Long-range sensors were picking up reality distortions moving toward the core worlds of the assembly. The entities were no longer content to work slowly. They were accelerating their timeline. The final crisis came when the entity network reached 47 nodes scattered across the galaxy. Suddenly, every piece of technology more advanced than simple mechanics began malfunctioning. Computers crashed as their circuits tried to process data that violated the laws of logic. Starships found themselves unable to navigate because their instruments reported impossible positions on 1,000 worlds. Civilians looked up at skies that no longer followed familiar patterns. Some planets experienced gravity that changed direction randomly, while others found that time moved at different speeds in different locations. The reality singers were beginning their final phase, and normal space was becoming increasingly unstable. The Galactic Assembly held one last, desperate meeting, but half the representatives could not attend because their ships had been caught in reality distortions. The delegates who did arrive looked like broken beings who had seen too much horror. Some species had already begun preparing for extinction, believing that nothing could stop the entities. Chancellor Vex stood before the remaining assembly members and spoke words that burned in his throat like acid. The Galactic Assembly formally requested immediate military intervention from humanity against an existential threat to all sapient life in the galaxy. The same humans they had expelled for being too dangerous were now their only hope for survival. The message was transmitted to human space using the most secure diplomatic channels available. The Assembly offered no conditions or demands. They simply asked for help against an enemy that could erase everything they had ever known. The irony was not lost on anyone. Humanity had been cast out for being a threat, and now they were being begged to save the galaxy from a far greater threat. Dr. Kim was monitoring deep space when she detected the first signs that the entity network was approaching its final configuration. Reality distortions were spreading between star systems, creating corridors of unstable space where the laws of physics fluctuated wildly. The transformation was accelerating, and soon it would be irreversible. In human space, military commanders received preliminary reports about the assembly crisis and began preparing for the possibility of intervention. But everyone knew that this would not be like any previous war. The enemy existed partially outside normal reality, and conventional tactics would be useless against them. The galaxy had chosen to reject human protection, and now they were learning what had been waiting in the darkness for humanity to stop watching. The reality singers were preparing to complete their great work and transform everything into something more suitable for beings that lived in impossible spaces. Time was running out, and only one species in the galaxy had ever successfully fought against enemies that could rewrite the laws of existence itself. The message from Chancellor Vex arrived at Earth Defense Command at exactly 1400 hours on a Tuesday, and Admiral Song read it 3 times before he believed what he was seeing. The Galactic Assembly was formally requesting immediate military intervention from humanity against what they called an existential threat to all sapient life in the galaxy. Admiral Song looked out the window of his office at the blue skies of Earth and felt no satisfaction in this moment that he had known would come. The reality singers had transformed 63 worlds in the months since their awakening, and their network was approaching the critical threshold that would allow galaxy-wide reality manipulation. There was no time for gloating or negotiations. The human response was swift and professional. Admiral Song activated Protocol 7, the contingency plan that humanity had developed for exactly this scenario. Within 6 hours, The human defense fleet's specialized units were moving toward assembly space. But these were not the conventional warships that the aliens remembered. Captain Nam commanded the lead vessel, Incheon Resolve, as the human fleet approached the transformed world that had once been Harmony. The ship's hull was covered with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and move when observed directly. These were counter symbols designed to create stable pockets of normal reality within zones of dimensional distortion. The crew of Incheon Resolve wore specialized equipment that looked like regular spacesuits but contained technology that the assembly had never seen before. Each suit had reality stabilizers that allowed the wearer to perceive and navigate impossible geometries without losing their sanity. The helmets had displays that could show multiple dimensional perspectives simultaneously. Dr. Lee was aboard the science vessel Busan Light, coordinating the technical aspects of the assault. But this was not going to be a conventional battle. Humanity's secret weapon was not superior firepower or better tactics. It was their unique understanding of how consciousness affected reality at quantum levels. Human minds had evolved in a reality with consistent physical laws, and this evolutionary history gave them the ability to impose order on chaos simply by observing and expecting normal behavior from the universe around them. Where other species saw impossible geometries and incomprehensible entities, humans saw problems to be solved and enemies to be defeated. The first phase of the human assault involved deploying reality anchor buoys around the transformed worlds. These devices projected fields of enforced normalcy zones where the laws of physics operated according to human understanding, rather than alien mathematics. The anchors did not destroy the entity constructions, but they made them vulnerable to conventional attacks. Captain Nam watched his tactical display as the reality anchors activated around Harmony. The impossible geometric structures that had replaced the planet's surface began to flicker and shift as competing versions of physics fought for dominance. In the areas where human reality fields were strongest, the alien constructions became solid and targetable. The battle that followed defied every conventional understanding of warfare. Human ships did not fire energy weapons or missiles at the reality singers. Instead, they projected concentrated fields of human consciousness, streams of ordered thought that forced chaotic interdimensional spaces to conform to logical rules. Commander Park was piloting a fighter craft called Soul Thunder. When she engaged her first reality singer directly, the entity appeared as a mass of folded space that existed in 17 dimensions at once. But when Park focused her mind through the consciousness projector on her ship, the creature became something that could be fought. The interdimensional fighting was brutal and costly. Several human ships were lost when their reality stabilization fields failed and their crews experienced the terror of watching physics break down around them. Matter stopped behaving predictably. Time flowed in circles and the boundary between inside and outside ceased to exist. Lieutenant Kim was aboard the destroyer Daegu Hope when the ship's reality anchor was damaged by an entity attack. Kim watched in horror as his crewmates began to age backwards, while the ship's computer started reporting that they were flying through solid rock. The ship existed in normal space and folded space simultaneously, but gradually, systematically, the human fleet began to push the entities back into the spaces between dimensions. The reality singers found themselves unable to maintain their constructions. In areas where human minds were actively enforcing natural law, the geometric network that had taken months to build began to collapse in hours. The final confrontation took place in the void between galaxies, where the main concentration of entities had been hiding since their defeat 15 years earlier. Admiral Song led a task force of 12 ships into interdimensional space, following the retreating reality singers to their home dimension. The space between realities was a place where normal matter could not exist, but human ships had been specifically designed for this environment. Their hulls were made of materials that could maintain structural integrity, even when the concept of structure itself became meaningless. Their crews wore suits that kept them alive in places where life and death were just suggestions. Dr. Yu was monitoring the interdimensional battle from her command center on Earth, and she watched in amazement as human ships fought creatures that existed in the gaps between existence. The battle was being fought on levels that her instruments could barely detect, with weapons that fired concentrated reality and shields made of crystallized space-time. The entities fought desperately to maintain their hold on normal space, but they were facing an enemy that could follow them anywhere humans went. Human consciousness was apparently capable of existing in any environment where existence was possible, and human technology could function in places where the laws of physics were more like guidelines. After 18 hours of fighting in spaces that should not exist, the last reality singer retreated into the deepest void between dimensions. The tiers in space-time began to seal themselves as the entity. Network collapsed and the transformed world slowly returned to normal physics. When the battle was over, 63 worlds had been restored to regular reality, but they would never be quite the same. The people who had lived through the transformation retained strange abilities to perceive hidden dimensions, and some of them reported seeing colors that had no names. The galaxy found itself forever changed by the experience. The Assembly's member species looked upon humanity with a mixture of gratitude and renewed fear, but this time the fear came from understanding just how different humans truly were. Where other species saw chaos and impossibility, humans saw order waiting to be imposed. In the aftermath, no formal treaties were signed and no official agreements were made. The message was clear: without words, humanity would continue to stand guard against the threats that lurked in the spaces between realities. Not because they were asked, but because someone had to. The Assembly could choose to appreciate that protection or fear it, but they could no longer afford to ignore it. The galaxy had learned that some doors should never be opened and some enemies required guardians who could fight in places where reality itself was just another weapon. Admiral Song returned to Earth knowing that the victory was temporary. The reality singers still existed in their interdimensional realm, held back by human vigilance, and the knowledge that humanity would always be watching. The price of peace was eternal readiness to fight battles that others could not even imagine. President An addressed the nation from Seoul, explaining that humanity had chosen to forgive the Assembly's betrayal, not because they deserved forgiveness, but because the alternative was watching the galaxy burn. The same strength that had made aliens fear humans was the only thing standing between civilization and the chaos that lived in impossible spaces. The human fleets remained at the edge of Assembly space, not as conquerors or occupiers, but as silent guardians watching the darkness between stars. Some alien species sent quiet messages of gratitude while others continued to fear human power, but all of them understood that humanity was essential for galactic survival. On distant monitoring stations, human technicians rebuilt the early warning systems that had been dismantled during the withdrawal. The reality anchors were redeployed throughout Assembly space, creating a network of stable spacetime that would prevent future incursions from interdimensional entities. Dr. Kim returned to her research, but now her work focused on understanding the connection between consciousness and reality. The battle against the reality singers had revealed that human minds possessed unique properties that could affect the fundamental structure of existence itself. The galaxy settled into an uneasy peace, knowing that somewhere in the void between realities, ancient enemies waited for another chance to remake existence according to their impossible geometries. But they also knew that humanity stood watch in the darkness, ready to fight battles that defied imagination, and in the deepest archives of human military intelligence, new files were created documenting weapons and tactics that operated beyond the boundaries of normal physics, preparing for the day when the reality singers might return, and the galaxy would once again need guardians who could impose order on chaos itself.